Hello. Our story begins inside the Ghost. The foundation of a friendship started with one simple conversation. Ezra had just returned from a mission where he had learned that his parents had been killed. They heard his message, one that inspired hope in the galaxy, one that predated Marva Karasi Andor's speech at Ferrix. Ezra's message was heard by Leia, the princess of Alderaan, who was just a day younger than he. Leia was told by Kanan that he had lost some people very close to him, and she knew who they were. Leia was always good at reading people's words, understanding what they truly meant, and she knew that these were Ezra's parents. She could see it on the hologram when she quietly walked into the lower cockpit where he was seated. The two of them had a short conversation, one about his inspiration, how he had inspired her and many like her, one where he asked why she was fighting when she was a princess, and how she believed the fight was more important than anything else. The boundaries of mutual understanding, compassion, and care were established here. Leia understood what it was like losing parents, except she had never met her biological ones, just individuals alluded to in stories and brief passings. Not even their names were revealed to her. Leia couldn't imagine what it was like losing them after spending 7 years with them, and 8 or 9 more years hoping that they were alive. But Ezra's parents made a sacrifice so that he could have a better life. The sacrifice shared by every freedom fighter since the birth of the Empire. Ezra and Leia had a couple more interactions before the Ghost Crew could successfully steal the 3 Hammerhead Corvettes from the docking bay. Before they separated, Leia gave Ezra an address. In the era of Empire, one couldn't simply communicate. Ezra especially could not be reaching out to the princess on Alderaan, because that would tell the Empire that a connection with a rebel cell existed. They'll needed to keep his Imperial Senate seat, and Alderaan could not be compromised. However, the address given was a silent communication frequency. It was a layered frequency, one that didn't directly point to Alderaan, rather, generally, the core. It was a simple configuration, one that Bail's allies used frequently, and Leia, in her spare time, learned how they did it. She was able to take and give calls or messages through this communication device without grabbing the attention of the Empire. On Ezra's side, this address meant that he needed to figure out his own means to communication. As Kanan had said before they met in the cockpit, Ezra would need a friend his own age. He was the youngest of the crew, and it would be good for him to have someone like Leia around. She was busy, and Ezra was busy, but establishing this line of connection in her mind was important for the two of them. They were both young, dealing with adult problems because the adults in their time allowed the Empire to rise. They were being mature because others couldn't be. And maybe that was a tall task to handle. Maybe they should just be kids. But neither Ezra nor Leia could simply sit still. A natural goodness existed within both of them, and this driving factor to do good was all it took. Ezra, after a couple weeks, was able to, with the help of Ahsoka and Chopper, manufacture a coded frequency that wouldn't give away rebel positions and allow him to get into contact with the princess. His first message wasn't really important. He instead told her a story. It was very typical of Ezra. Find the best way to bring himself down to earth. While yes, talking to a princess, even in the friendly manner, was daunting, for Ezra it was all about connection. He told a story about naming himself Jabba the Hutt, and how he used such a code name to escape the clutches of the Empire. He twisted some pieces of the story, not to sound more heroic, but to add a more jubilant and comical side to everything. Leia was working as a junior legislator with her father. She was very intelligent, and she excelled easily. But that didn't mean days weren't stressful, especially leading a double life at the age of 15. But the message she received was all the joy she had been needing. It wasn't about romance, just simple connection, one human being to another. And that was it. Simple. Ezra put his first step forward with a funny story, and was met with another comical story, and that's how the two of them connected. Ezra and Leia were two very different people, but because they weren't forcing anything, because it was completely natural as a friendship, it worked. It never would have worked in any other way. Ezra had his Ghost Crew, who he adored, and Leia had her small family, which she adored. Their roles in the rebellion were very different, but equally as important, and that could not be overstated. One of Ezra's final messages before they turned 16 was him referencing his nervousness about an upcoming mission to Malachor. They were tracking some Inquisitors and following a trail given to them by former Master Yoda. She would send an encouraging message, hoping that it would reach him before he left, but it wouldn't receive a response for a little less than a month, which didn't help her at all. With Fulcrum vanishing off the face of the galaxy and little news coming from the rebel base at Atalan, she feared for her friend's life. But he turned out to be alright, which resulted in her sending another friendly message to him. Ezra struggled with responding. He had read the first message again and again, but he couldn't really break past it. In his mind, he failed his master. Kanan lost his sight because of him, and he couldn't fail like that again. The seeds of the dark side were planted in his mind by Maul, and with the Sith holocron, Ezra could achieve power that would aid him and his friends in destroying the Sith and toppling the Empire. But all of this felt so daunting. He blamed himself for Ahsoka's death, and for Maul's betrayal, neither of which were his doing. Kanan wasn't around much, because he was trying to find his balance in the Force, but he never blamed Ezra. That wasn't his burden to bear. When Ezra did send the message to Leia, he sent a long written apology, one expressing that he had failed. He had made a mistake that cost his master's vision, and he couldn't find the words to tell her. It hurt him more than anything, and he understood as she felt slighted by this. Ezra's self-doubt rose with his plunge in the darkness. As a young man, he relied on the light as instructed, but now the seeds of evil were sprouting. The Sith holocron called to him, and as he grew as a young man, he grew as a Jedi, one consumed with power that could drive him in the darkness, just as it had so many other Jedi before him. Despite having the long-distance friendship with Leia, Ezra's trip down the dark path wouldn't change. He and Leia wouldn't see much of each other over the next 2 years, aside from maintaining a steady array of messages. The reason this didn't change Ezra's dive into the dark side is because Ezra never saw it as bad. The darkness is a corruption, one that gives quick and easy results, which it was doing for Ezra. As the age of 17 rolled around for Bridger, he felt more powerful than ever before. He and Kanan were as distant as they had ever been with each other, and he was fully utilizing the dark side to power himself. This gave him the ability to wield the Force unlike ever before, and Ezra loved it. The raw power he felt was insatiable, and what made it worse for him was they were winning because of it. Ezra never really spoke about the use of the holocron. Something about him knew it was wrong, but if it was wrong, then why did it feel so right? On the planet of Nakara, he, Sabine, Zeb, and Chopper broke into an Imperial prison to free Hondo Anaka for information his old friend had. The mission was a success, but Ezra truly exhibited a show of his new power since using the holocron, which wasn't just a sick kick flip, but utilizing the Force to control other beings' minds and use a walker against their own men. Bridger was slipping down the dark path, and his friend, Leia, had no clue. There were no signs. Ezra was the same. He was goofy, mostly, serious when needed, and comforting always. The dynamic grew as each of them did, but they were still just friends. It was the perfect counter to everything. The veil was broken for Ezra when Kanan discovered his usage of the holocron, and that was quickly resolved because there was no need to be using such a vile tool. This led to some resentment that eventually bubbled over into acceptance and reconciliation. Master and apprentice, as a result, were now stronger than ever as a duo. Their relationship had been rectified through this understanding. It truly wasn't until they were closing in on adulthood that Leia and Ezra saw each other again in person. They ran into each other because Leia was doing a mission for Bail and bringing supplies for Chopper Base out to Atalan. Ezra was sitting by the gate, one keeping all the arachnid Krykna spiders away from the base. His eyes were closed and he was again trying to connect with one of these spiders. With the Force, he was always able to connect to animals, naturally, so he was again trying with this different spider. He could feel Leia's arrival, but he waited, knowing that in some way she would find her way out to him. When she did eventually come out to visit him, he didn't open his eyes or turn his head. He made a joke about wondering when she'd actually come out to see him. She rolled her eyes and told him that someone had to do all the unloading. Apparently, that wasn't him. He snorted, surprised by the quick response. He turned around and stood up. So much had changed. When they were 15, she dwarfed him. Now saying he dwarfed her was an understatement. It was weird. They knew each other so well. They understood the other's insecurities, traumas, joys, and well, everything else in between. And yet, how did they do this? Seeing each other for the first time in 2 years was jarring. The person they had been speaking to through multiple simple messages stood across from them. They both had to take everything in for a moment, because so much had changed. They gave each other a short hug before breaking apart and smiling. To break the awkwardness of the moment, he pulled her attention towards the Krykna spider. he was trying to connect to, asking if she'd ever tried connecting to an animal before. She laughed through her nose in confusion. How would one be able to do that? He told her it was easy. Everyone had the Force. Surely she'd have no issue with it. Unless, of course, she was too good to do it. He pressed his hands on his hips and lifted his chin to the sky in a mocking way. A way that got her to playfully shove him but grip his arm, so that he didn't fall out and get eaten by the spider. Even though both he and she knew that he wouldn't have fallen. He told her to come hither as he grabbed her hand with his free one and tugged her towards the gate where the spider was walking. He told her to sit and then expressed that he had connected with these spiders before. But this guy was tricky. She asked if it was because he had an identity theft problem, and the spider couldn't recognize him. Ezra shrugged his shoulders, tilting his head from side to side. Maybe. He used her shoulder to help him get down, pretending to be old in his young age, telling her that maybe the wit of the legendary Lando Calrissian was too good for the spider. She looked up. Lando who? Never mind. Don't worry about it. He sat with his legs crossed, facing her with his torso and walking her through the steps. He told her about the Force, aside from what had been shared in the past 2 years, and then he gently lifted her hand, instructing her to feel through the Force. She did, and he asked her what she could feel. It was a little blocked for her, but she remembered what old Ben had told her. The Force was like turning on a light in the darkness. It was always present, and it was always giving. She used Ben's instruction when she reached out. Ezra watched with intrigue as the spider stopped. He was interested. The creature murmured to itself by clicking in its own weird way, before moving closer. Leia continued to focus, melting into the Force, allowing it to become one with her. She could feel the being as it could feel her. They were connected by one Force. Ezra was impressed. She opened her eyes and the spider was looking at her, before it hissed and scurried away, startling the both of them, who fell backwards dramatically and looked up into the sky together. They were silent. What could be said? A million thoughts for each of them, but Ezra started, as per usual, asking how long she had been using the Force, and she shrugged, telling him more personally about how she'd always known things before they were said, but it never made any sense. A friend she had, named Ben Kenobi, was very expressive about the Force. Ezra wondered if this Ben Kenobi was related to an Obi-Wan Kenobi. Who knew? He asked her if she ever wanted to be a Jedi, and she laughed. Like him? No. He was serious though, suggesting that if she was willing, he had some holocrons that he'd love to share. He didn't have a lightsaber, but he could help her with getting one. Leia was fine with trying, but didn't promise anything. As he ran to get the holocron, he slipped, creating another laugh for the two of them. They spoke about some other things, but when she left with Ahsoka's old holograms of Anakin Skywalker, her master. Leia would be training with her dad, and she wouldn't ever know it. Leia and Ezra had to cease communication after a Talon, which created an even deeper pull towards each other. Their separation was forced because Grand Admiral Thrawn of the 7th Fleet was closing in on the rebels, and they couldn't afford to have any loose ends. The deal for Ezra was that he would never leave the Ghost Crew. That was his family, through and through. Not to mention, one of his anchoring motivations was saving his home planet of Lothal. Aside from worry of Thrawn closing in, Sabine was beginning her training with sabers, and as a Mandalorian, she was as stubborn as ever regarding it, not to mention an entirely different quest with Maul and Ezra, which would lead Bridger to finding Kenobi on Tatooine. Before Maul showed up, Ezra told Ben that he gave Leia holograms from Ahsoka to train with. He only said this because he thought Ben would be happy to know that his young friend was doing well. Ben was, but there were a couple of things. Firstly, he was glad to hear that Ahsoka lived, not knowing about her little comeuppance on Malachor. He was glad that Leia was doing well. However, there was an underlying worry about Leia training with Anakin's holograms. Not because he taught darkness, but because that was her actual father. These were not things Ben said to Ezra, both for time constraints and because the secret couldn't get out. Kenobi believed that Ezra had a bright future ahead of him, but at the moment, these secrets needed to remain just that, secrets. Maul would die all the same, and Ezra would return to Chopper Base. Following the rebel route from a Talon, Ezra and Leia were able to start talking again. He found a lightsaber crystal on a Talon, thanks to the guidance of the Great Bendu, who could sense who and what Leia was, due to the foundational connection established with Ezra. It was like a thread from one being to another. The Bendu could feel all connected to Ezra, and Leia, among them, had the great potential to be the change. Bendu didn't just give Ezra a kyber crystal, rather, he guided him to find it, a gift that could perpetuate the light. Bendu was the neutral, but the light was the Force, and the light was more than just Jedi, and he accepted that. Bendu had seen a vision of what Ezra didn't know, but it gave the great being enough reason to aid Bridger in finding this crystal. Before the Battle of Atalon, Ezra crafted Leia a lightsaber so that he could give it to her. It was a bit finer tuned than his own, shinier, with its model being framed off of his memory of Obi-Wan's lightsaber, assuming that it would hold a deep connection for her. They eventually met again, inside the Tantive 4 outside of some random star system in the Outer Rim territories. It was their first time being separated without contact since before they ever met. Their times separated from each other without the other identified their actual need and desire for the other, because both of them had strong family units. Leia had Brea and Bail, Ezra had siblings in Sabine, Chopper, and Zeb, plus his parental unit in Hera and Kanan, with the addition of crazy Uncle Rex. He had a complete family, and she did too. But this pull to each other came from more than just family. They were a piece to each other's puzzle that they didn't find anywhere else. This innocent, intimate space where they could both be themselves without the facade of their own roles as junior legislator and lieutenant commander were what they needed. Meeting each other again came with an embrace. She excitedly told him that she'd been practicing with the Jedi Master from the hologram. She didn't have a lightsaber, but when she was a kid, she used to go out on grand adventures outside the palace, so she went out and grabbed a stick to use as her lightsaber. She'd been using a tree branch to train with, like the old Jedi used to do with Boken sticks. He smiled and told her that he was glad she found time to do that, and he expressed that he had been learning what he could about the Imperial Senate, but truthfully, that was a bit too complicated. But despite his struggles to learn about Imperial politics, he did have a gift for her. It was nicely wrapped thanks to the help of Mama Syndulla. Leia was very surprised that Ezra would trust her with a lightsaber, but Leia was actually very excited about this. Such a draw to Ezra for Leia was she brought out her inner child. They were still young, only young adults, but they had a responsibility that belonged to people far beyond their years. Leia had to be an adult, especially after the Inquisitor incident that happened when she was only 9. This was mostly an internal battle for her, just trying to avoid putting her parents through that again. Not to mention, as much as she enjoyed the political realm her father brought her into, it could be very stuffy. So having someone in her life that could reduce the stuffiness of the Imperial political noise was a gift that couldn't be more appreciated. Plus, in her mind, swinging the stick like a lunatic in the quiet of her room helped her get out some pent-up stress. Leia grabbed his hand and pulled him into an adjacent room and ignited a beautiful blue lightsaber, smiling at it. She looked at the hilt and grinned, but she didn't know why. Ezra stood quietly with his arms crossed and asked if she liked it. Leia nodded her head, but she didn't know why she liked it. He expressed that, after they lost contact with each other, he had met Ben Kenobi, assuming that Obi-Wan had a different alias, and he created the lightsaber based off of Obi-Wan's. He hoped it was familiar, but he really couldn't get it all right. He'd only seen it in passing, as the blade was hidden under his. He was cut off when the air was taken out of his lungs by a swift hug. Leia told him it was perfect. However, did it actually hold up? He watched her grin, igniting the lightsaber again, and pointing it forward dramatically, like an Alderaanian Olympian might. And they began a small duel. A couple strikes here and there, a parry, a block. Ezra went light against her, but she really had been using Ahsoka's holograms of Anakin. When they were finished with their little spar, Leia thanked him again for the lightsaber. She asked that he come along, and as they left the room, it was like she transformed back into her political self. A guard walked by and she nodded at them with a powerful aura. Ezra was so interested in this. Why the personality shift? He didn't realize that she felt safe enough to be herself around him, something Leia didn't do just for anyone. The two of them walked through the halls and into the communication center for debriefing, the typical conversation that would have directions and fleet movements. Ezra and Leia, despite having this pull to each other, needed to be split up again. Bridger refused to leave his crew. It was everything to him. And it wasn't that Leia didn't have the potential to be that, but their lives were in very different places at the moment. With the Imperial Senate still kicking, Leia had responsibilities in the core, and Ezra had his planet. As Ghost Squad moved to Lothal to try and rectify things, Leia returned to Alderaan. They again were separated because of this. even as far as no contact. It did suck, but in a weird way, it made their dynamic stronger. Apart from each other, they were still connected. Leia and Ezra thought about each other frequently, and they recorded messages that they could send when they were in contact again. Due to the bond between the two of them, when the Battle of Lothal was nearing its completion, following the death of Jedi Knight Kanan Jarrus, the rebels sent a spare fleet to assist the Ghost Crew. It wasn't much, because Bail couldn't pull too many spare forces for combat, but it was an addition, one that bought Ezra enough time to use another strategy. Instead of having his interaction with the Emperor, Grand Admiral Thrawn was delayed by some blockade runners that started a chase over the barren fields of the tortured planet. Thrawn wasn't dumb enough to chase these rebels. They were only in the way, and regardless of them trying to run him away from the capital city, it wouldn't work. But it bought time for Wolf and Mart to use the Ghost and pilot through Captain Paleon's defense fleet with a force of Purrgil. When the Ghost pulled through the atmosphere, they got there before the Chimera and her flanking destroyers could get to the city, giving Ezra time to get on board the ship as his friends set the launch codes to send the Imperial complex into the sky. When Thrawn got to the capital city, after crippling the two blockade runners that were unable to get away from his heavy turbo lasers, he saw the Imperial complex drifting into the distance. Annoyance filled him as he told the crew to ready the heavy turbo lasers. Hera, who was now in the pilot's seat of the Ghost, faced down the Chimera and her support ships. Thrawn contacted her, telling her to surrender and Lothal would not be destroyed. She didn't really give him a satisfying answer, because she told him to look out behind him. The Purrgil herd drifted down from the sky, and Ezra popped out the back ramp of the ship. His shoulders were being held by Zeb, who watched his young friend connect to these beings through the Force. Their tentacles collapsed onto the hull of the destroyer, while crippling Thrawn's support craft. He told the deckhands to open fire on General Syndulla, and as they readied their weapons, to obliterate the rebels, Ezra connected to the Purrgil, and they activated their hyperspace, sending Grand Admiral Thrawn to a galaxy away, leaving the Imperial fleet over Lothal a total wreck. Ezra fell backwards as Zeb pulled him up the ramp. The Ghost drifted forward above the city. From the ramp, where everyone was gathering, they could see people celebrating. They had won. They survived. Ezra smiled. A tear slipped down his cheek. Off in the distance, the Imperial complex exploded, killing Governor Price and Ruck in the process. Lothal was freed. The rebel support craft, while damaged, had landed in the fields and would be able to get repaired by their allies that didn't get destabilized. Hera, Sabine, Zeb, Ezra, Chopper, and all the heroic friends sat idly, watching the people come out to celebrate the end of Imperial occupation. Even Hondo found some joy in such an occasion. When the Ghost Crew returned to Yavin, Ezra asked Leia if it was her that sent the aid. He wanted to be jubilant and jumping for joy, but since the battle ended, a pensive feeling washed over him. He had prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. The 3 Jedi Masters in his lineage had done that. Windu sacrificed himself to save the Republic. Alaba sacrificed herself to save Caleb, and Kanan sacrificed himself to save his family. Ezra was about to do the same thing for Lothal, and while he would do it again if he had the chance or the opportunity presented itself, the realization of what would have been was jarring. He'd be alone again, not knowing if his plan worked, not knowing if the Empire never vanished. He might have died with Thrawn, and that was okay, but he would have never known. He told all of this to Leia, and he thanked her with his whole heart for doing literally anything she could to get aid to them. Without the 4 blockade runners, Thrawn wouldn't have been delayed, and everything would have played out much differently. On Yavin, Ghost Crew would stay for several months. The war was heating up, and with 2 Jedi on their side, it was important for the rebels to show their unity. Leia and Ezra were able to spend all this time with each other, in person. Sometimes, she'd join the Ghost Crew on their missions, but General Syndulla was slowing down. She was pregnant, and despite still running operations for the rebels, it was growing increasingly difficult for her. The rest of the crew picked up the slack for her, especially since Sabine wasn't on Lothal guarding it. When they weren't running these rebel missions, Ezra and Leia were training together in secrecy, so that no one could expose the princess as a Jedi. They were working on the Force and accessing it in new and exciting ways. Without Kanan, the Force felt like the best way to find his master. Ezra struggled immensely with his master's death, but he also understood that such a death was one that was necessary. Kanan did it because he loved them all. He became one with the Force and he saw again. The last thing he ever saw was the family he loved, the family he would do anything for. And there was a true sense of beauty in all of that, even for Ezra. though there was something special that happened with Ezra and Leia training together. These two beings were some of the most powerful in the galaxy from an M-count standpoint. One was a prodigy, and the other was the daughter of the Chosen One. They had the potential to change the galaxy forever. Thanks to being on Yavin, they were able to find a stockpile of Jedi and Sith holocrons. Ezra had no intention of using the Sith holocrons again, but these Jedi ones were from an era that had long passed. An era where the Jedi were warriors, not just knights, and the information hidden inside the Revan-era holocrons were accessed by the two young minds, eager to learn. The Revanites of the Galactic War used Yavin as a base of operations to plot against both Jedi and Sith, and therefore their information was crossed between them. Not to mention, before the Revanites ever came here, Yavin 4 was utilized by the Sith, before a Jedi attack cleansed the planet of their filth. It had been over millennia since the Jedi or Sith were here, but their ancient legacy provided tools for the new generation of Jedi. While lightsaber training was important for the two very close friends, they found much more strength through the Force, as any Jedi must. Ezra brought Kanan's teachings with him into his instruction of Leia. Because Kanan instructed a Boken Jedi, and the information they learned were from two different eras of warriors, their viewpoint of the Jedi Order was warped. Anakin's recordings were from the Clone Wars, and the other, ancient ones from an era where a galactic war kept growing. So instead of a peaceful, benevolent order like the one Kanan taught Ezra about, they learned about how to fight the darkness, how to use their strengths against them. This did not mean that they forsake what Kanan taught Ezra. It simply meant that their base was firm in the teachings of the order Kanan grew up in, but they expanded their warrior path through those who thrived and lived during times of great conflict. This turned the two young Force users into absolute monsters. Their raw potential, with their connection, helped them grow exponentially. Leia and Ezra would have thrived during the era of the Republic, because they would have had proper training, but now they were forming an attachment to each other through their chaining, which meant they were as tight as a dyad, but they did not have the same genetic, Force makeup to actually be a dyad in the Force, so instead they were simply just bound to each other. It would also be on Yavin, where they would confess their truest feelings for each other. While Sabine saw this coming from years ago, everyone else, aside from maybe Hera, was surprised. So much of what worked about this dynamic was the roles they played for each other. Again, for Leia, this relationship helped her be herself in privacy. Being able to release the chains of burden and legacy was very challenging. She was Bail Organa's daughter, but Ezra made her forget that, because to him, she was always just Leia, not in the demeaning way, but in the accepting who she was way, and that was emboldening, unlike anything else she had ever experienced. Ezra, on the other hand, was just totally fulfilled. He had everything he wanted. Mama Syndulla was doing alright, his adopted family was always around, his home world was safe from the Empire, and Leia was the cherry on top. She was his best friend, and well, that could also be identified as a partner too. Their training with each other wasn't just about the Force, but about understanding one another, which didn't just make their comprehension of the Force better, but it made them as people better. It was the perfect way for them to conduct these lessons. It also helped Ezra out significantly. As a Boken Jedi, it was his role to pass the torch to another generation, who, he didn't know yet. But because of Leia, when that time came, he'd have the confidence to bestow the knowledge of the Jedi onto another. Eventually, Ezra and Leia would be aboard the Tantive 4, and the Raddus during the Battle of Scarif. Rogue One went to Scarif alone, and Raddus went to follow. Ezra almost went with the Ghost Crew, but he didn't, being that Hera had all the crew necessary to arm the weapons on the Ghost. Plus, Hera believed that Ezra should be with the girl he loved. They hadn't shown any public acknowledgement of their feelings, but those closest to either of them knew the answer. Hera's decision and Ezra's departure with Leia was a brilliant play, one that would have the couple escaping in the hyperspace. They were trailed by Vader's Devastator after the Battle of Scarif to Tatooine, where, upon being tracked down, Leia multiplied the Death Star plans, sending a copy with R2 and 3PO down to the surface. They didn't want to have to do this, but they weren't going to bring the Empire to Yavin. Because Leia was still playing the part of the princess and not revealing her nature as a Jedi, Ezra went to the main corridor to greet the stormtroopers when they arrived. The Alderaanian Guard planted themselves within the corridor and waited. When the doors bursted open, Ezra's blade ignited, and the rebels fought off the Imperial attack. Ezra blocked shots back into the stormtroopers. His position on the front lines gave the rebels a sense of energy. He was distracting the stormtroopers enough that rebel fighters weren't dying. The firefight continued to intensify, with Imperial troopers barricading the door that they were trying to enter, with their dead bodies piling up and rebel soldiers holding off. As all seemed right, the blaster fire stopped, and the stormtroopers retreated. The rebels celebrated, calling out orders to get the restraints off the ship. Ezra didn't pay attention to their jubilee. He could feel him. It was Vader. He told the rebels to go quickly, do what they needed to do. He would hold Vader here. Ezra wasn't the same boy he was all those years ago when he fought Vader. A 16-year-old was no match for the Sith Lord, but a 19-year-old, well, actually the odds were much better. But Ezra wasn't just any ordinary Jedi. Vader recognized the boy, complimenting his glow-up. So much of it would have been time wasted for nothing. All of his talents would have been better served on the dark side. Ezra raised both of his eyebrows, suggesting that Vader would have been better off being a waiter inside of a moof milker's tavern. But that wouldn't be good for customer service, gesturing to Vader's mask. This battle wouldn't be like Malachor. Ezra slid his weapon to his side and watched Vader close in. The hulking, mechanical being dragged his weapon across the wall, giving room for Ezra to slide under, before swinging at him, blasting a block and spinning away. Vader and Ezra collided again, which was a firm strike, one forceful enough to push Ezra back. It was hard to get back into the swing of things. It had been years since they last fought, and as a fully grown man, it was different defending from Vader this time. Ezra felt confidence gain as he avoided another slash that ripped through the door panel. He jolted away, blocking another strike as blaster fire started to erupt in the distance. Ezra's back was now facing the entrance of the door, and his arrogant smile only pissed Vader off even more. The Sith raised his shoulders and pressed forward. Ezra backpedaled away, ducking and blocking each and every strike that came his way. He smiled as he did this. All of his training was paying off right here in this moment. Ezra slipped under a strike before getting thrown from his feet and into the hangar bay of the Imperial Star Destroyer. Instead of his military force, Vader saw dead men littering the halls. The rebels had broken out and they were unlocking the restraints on the Tantive 4. Ezra climbed to his feet and shrugged, telling Vader that he could have had it all. He had the perfect build for servitude. Well, Ezra snickered. He was already doing that. Vader raged forward, swinging viciously at Ezra, who dropped out of the way, parrying another strike and then defending himself adequately, using his speed to his advantage, that being his only real strength here in this contest. Their blades interlocked and a clicking could be heard, one depicting that the Tantive 4 was freed from the destroyer. Ezra shoved at Vader before being overpowered and thrown from his feet again. He looked up and smiled. Vader towered over him and told him that he would finally die. Without showing a hint of cowardice, Ezra asked what he was waiting for. Did he need permission from his master to kill him too? Vader was not having it. His arm slid forward until the hissing of another lightsaber brought his attention away. His swing completely missed as Ezra rolled out of the way and Leia's lightsaber swung forward, ripping through the upper half of Vader's shoulder before slicing him diagonally across his mask and dropping him to the ground. The rebels who were ferrying back into the Corvette watched in awe. The princess, she was a Jedi. Ezra got to Leia's side and she looked down at Vader, who turned his attention to them. His right eye was barely exposed, and there was an immediate sense of familiarity. Leia could feel it, and Vader could feel it. Leia could also see it too. She trained with Anakin Skywalker, and yet those were his eyes. Maybe not similar in color, but similar in everything else. Ezra lightly tugged her hand and she snapped back to the moment, as they ran back to the ship and it slipped out and boosted into hyperspace. Once they were gone, a communication went out to Hera. She was just finished having her child, so she sent Sabine and Zeb in the Ghost to pick up the crew of the Tantive 4. Hera would stay on Ryloth with her father. Iron Squad was sent to Tatooine to retrieve the droids. Leia and Ezra, on the other hand, would spend some time inside of her room, talking. She was expressive, telling Ezra that she knew that person. It had to be Anakin, it just had to be. But not just that, there was something more. Anakin may have been someone closer to her. She didn't know, but she could feel it. Leia always had this sense about her, and thanks to her training, and of course her boy toy Ezra, she was able to express these feelings out in a way that helped her feel more at ease with what she had seen and what she believed she had seen. He told her that he would help her discover the truth of this, and he would be by her side as long as she wanted. Following their pickup from Dantooine in the Ghost, they would abandon the Corellian Corvette on the system for the Imperial trackers to find. Tatooine would have Iron Squad picking up 3PO, R2, Ben, and Luke. Young Skywalker's aunt and uncle were still killed by Vader's squad sent to the surface. Because the Death Star plans could be anywhere, Tarkin, in an effort to get them, moved the Death Star to Alderaan and publicly threatened the destruction of the system to get Leia to give over those plans. His rationale was that the rebellion had the plans for the weapon, and if they had control over those plans, then they could destroy everything. He threatened because it was a last resort. If the rebellion destroyed the space station, then 20 years of work went down the drain. They could not allow that. Plus, who cares if the galaxy knew about the incredible power of the Death Star? It would help them maintain stability over the galaxy. Sidious did not like this. He knew it was a foolish mistake. Sure, the power of the Death Star was for flaunting, but threatening to destroy a core world like Alderaan to get Princess Leia would rally people in the core for their fight against the Empire. This would aid the rebellion more than anything, and there lied the issues with Imperial officers. Short-term results did not always live in long-term success. Tarkin's record had been pretty spotless, but this was a panicked move, and one done out of frustration. He realized his mistake after he sent the message, but it went public very quickly. Not too long after sending said message, Tarkin was usurped. Vader was brought back to Coruscant and another admiral was sent to take over control over the super weapon, until they could make a proper decision. On the Rebel side of things, Leia and Ben reunited. The Death Star plans were given to the surviving Rebel fighters from Scarif, and they prepared for a blitz on the Death Star. Leia learned about her lineage from Ben, when she asked him why she recognized Vader. As she always did, because duty called, she suppressed her anger and her frustrations. She was mad at both of her parents. What they didn't tell her was a really big deal. Anakin and Padme weren't just nobodies. They were very important to the galaxy of the Republic era. And if Anakin was Vader, she was connected to what she saw in her mind as true evil. This was disorienting for her, and Ezra tried to get her to take a break, but she needed to be present for the Rebel assault on the Death Star. She would be in the communication room as they exited from hyperspace. Thanks to the way things had gone, it gave Rebel survivors enough time to group up in different locations before moving themselves to Alderaan. The main cell from Yavin was the largest, and it had accompanying groups from Crate, Hoth, and Ashen Claws. The assault on the Death Star, with aid from the Ghost, this time flown without Hera, and the accompanying rebels from different cells, and Luke Skywalker, they would find victory. The rebels wouldn't be seen as terrorists. They worked out of fear for the protection of Alderaan. The worst part is, the Imperial officer who was meant to take over exited hyperspace just as the weapon exploded, and his Lambda shuttle was crushed by a massive piece of debris. Instead of fear over the act of the Alliance, the people in the galaxy would celebrate. The rebellion was the people's ally. That much had become clear. On Yavin, Leia and Ezra were sitting in their training area. Yavin was a safe place, not just for the rebellion, but for the two of them. He consoled her. So much of her wanted to be angry. Leia knew better than to end things on a bad note, which is why she never got mad at her parents, especially not with the Death Star over the planet. But she still had valid reasons to be upset. The information was horrible. If she wanted to have any future in politics, she wouldn't get it. Vader being her father destroyed any of her hopes and her aspirations for the future. Ezra reminded her that people were capable of change. He reminded her of who she was, and why people would love her, like he did. Well, not like he did, but maybe a close second or third. That got a smile from her, and he reminded her that where someone comes from doesn't define their own legacy. She could have her name written in the stars as a senator of a future republic, or she could be a Jedi who brought the Order back from the dead. Whatever it was, she was in command of that destiny, and he would always be here to support her. It was in this moment when Leia knew that they'd be together forever. She had known for a while, but this confirmed any minute doubts she may have ever had about this relationship. And with the sunset before them, she told him to stay with her. His eyes scanned hers, and he could see how she meant it. She really did mean it. His hand firmed around hers, and he promised forever. A day after the celebrations, Leia would wake up Ezra from a midday nap with a diabolical idea. She poked him awake with a playful stance. His eyes watched her, and she told him her idea. He laughed, coughing himself awake and asking if she was trying to be him. She smiled and shook her head, pulling out a holocron and used the Force to open it, showing him exactly what she was thinking. He asked if she really thought this would work, and she nodded her head. Once Ezra wasn't sleep-deprived, he wandered into the communication chamber, where Leia sat with a stone-cold face. She was back to playing the part. He asked her what she had in mind. She explained that due to an Imperial warship going to Dantooine to find the Tantive 4, they were able to reverse the frequency they had, and it gave the rebels contact to any Imperial fleet. Ezra and Leia, therefore, took the transponder and left the communication room. Leia and Ezra needed complete solitude for this. Ben went out to watch in curiosity. She didn't tell him the plan, but she was thankful for Ben's honesty about her lineage. Regardless, the two partners sat down and they held each other's hands. Ezra asked if this sounded good and started mocking Palpatine's voice. The dark side. She started to giggle before firming her face, while hiding a smile and telling him it was very serious. He mocked her, very serious, which only got her to laugh again. After they settled, their hands came together once more and they closed their eyes. Between them sat the transponder code, and on the ground next to them, surrounded by grass, was a holocron. The ground started to pool and wind started to kick up. Obi-Wan's arms were crossed, hidden under his long sleeves, as we watched in interest. Across the galaxy, inside of an Imperial Star Destroyer, the Emperor appeared over a hologram. The Admiral of the fleet bowed, asking for the Emperor's bidding. Lord Sidious told him that it was time to ensure the people of Coruscant understood their masters. The Admiral nodded, agreeing with the sentiment. The Emperor told him to level the Imperial Palace and the Senate building. It was time for a new era to begin. The officer nodded, asking if the area was clear, to which Palpatine explained it was. The hologram vanished, and the Admiral went to the bridge. The Imperial capital ship cruised through the atmosphere and closed in on the Senate district. Sidious was inside of the palace, using his Sith altar to try and access the world between worlds. Tarkin's blunder had cost the Empire resources and morale. Sidious wanted to rectify this. As he was preparing to start another ritual to access said world between worlds, he heard a rumbling. What was that noise? He turned his head and watched the fire consume the entire Imperial Palace, with bombers dropping the bombs and detonating him on impact. He didn't even have a chance to prepare himself. He was so confused. Turns out Ezra Bridger was the greatest identity theft in galactic history. Though without Leia's help and brilliant planning, this wouldn't have been accomplishable. Using the Force to form themselves into someone else was challenging enough for Jedi Masters, but these two were kids and it completely wiped them out. Luckily, it was only a short burst of energy. Ben was by their side when they were finished, helping them with their little recovery. Palpatine's death would crater the Imperial military, especially because, despite the Admiral claiming he was ordered to, he literally came off as schizophrenic. No one had seen Palpatine's message except for him, and there were no logs in any communication database of receiving or sending a message from the Emperor. Everything was simply untraceable, and this created a divide. If the Fleet Admiral of Coruscant could turn on the Emperor, then who was left? While the fight for the Alliance and their heroes would be very important to ending the Empire, most of its destruction came from within, and it did take a couple years to happen. Vader wouldn't join the Alliance, but he would be a part of the fall of the Empire. Deciding that without the Sith watching over his shoulder, he didn't want it anymore. As the last Sith, he would disband their evil order, and it would die with him. Until then, he would go to prison under the flag of the New Republic. This of course took about a year and a half to fully transpire. Everything after Alderaan was accelerated, especially with Palpatine dying only a couple days after. The system crumbled in on itself. Leia and Ezra would marry shortly after using identity theft to kill the Emperor. Their fire was too bright to neglect. Leia's identity as a Jedi would lead people to be very wary of her as she entered the New Republic Senate. But it was through this Jedi connection that people early on learned of her lineage. It was through this revelation that people could see that next generations were all about growing beyond. Leia grew beyond her father, and she helped make sure he remained in prison. Luke would be the first of them to forgive his father, but Leia would eventually do so, being that Alderaan was only threatened. She still had her family, but Leia forgave Vader because of Ezra. He knew that Vader was evil and all that, and he didn't deserve her forgiveness, but Leia was more than he was, and in being more than evil, she could forgive, forget, and move on. If she wanted connection, it was always there. If not, then that was Vader's loss. For Anakin, living in prison wasn't the greatest life ever, but it was better than nothing. He still had his children, who actually cared about him, which made him feel at least content inside of his cell. Even Obi-Wan eventually visited him. Not for nothing, Anakin did like Ezra a lot, but Ezra didn't exactly feel the same about him, but that's okay. Ezra at the very least apologized for calling him a servant droid inside of a Moof Milker's tavern. Leia continued into the New Republic Senate and started working on the new path of forging a true democracy in the rubble of tyranny. Ezra would be with her during this. Despite the idea of joining Luke on his journey seeming interesting, he didn't want that. Ezra's life always revolved around found family. Because Mandalore wasn't shelled into the Stone Age, Sabine was able to go home. Zeb and Kallus assisted rebel forces with quelling Imperial remnants, and Hera continued flying with Spectre 8, her son Jason. Ezra's biggest concern was being a part of Jason's life. He could teach him the Force, if Hera wanted or even permitted, but his goal was to be a stable face in his cousin's or little brother's life. Being with Leia and democracy was the perfect way to help. Ezra didn't do too much on Coruscant aside from helping out with Republic cadets and local academies, which was perfect in his mind. Luke and Obi-Wan went to Dagobah to train with Yoda, before eventually restarting the Jedi Order together. While that was beautiful in of itself, Leia and Ezra wouldn't ever join. Their bond to each other was far too important, and Ezra truthfully disagreed with the idea of the traditional Jedi sect. Of course he would. He was trained by Kanan Jarrus. But Luke was like his masters, and with Kenobi still around, the code became very fundamental in Luke's life as a Jedi. Leia and Ezra's first child would be a girl named Mira Padme Bridger, named after Ezra's and Leia's moms. Eventually there'd be a much younger son named Ben Oha Bridger, Ben being after Kenobi and Oha being a traditional name from Lothal that Ezra loved. The Bridger family would be perfect. Of course, Leia, Mira, and Ben were all a part of the Ghost Crew, becoming Spectres 9, 10, and 11. Those numbers would continue to grow exponentially in the years that followed. But for now, right as the New Republic found stability in the galaxy, it was perfect. The Empire would die out before the birth of the First Order, and upon Vader's release of the Sith values, their religion died with him and the Sith cultists of Exegol. Hera and Ezra would always maintain their mother and son dynamic. Even if they didn't see each other for long periods of time, they always gave each other hugs on screen, Ahsoka Season 1, as well as Ezra taking great care and love of Jason. While Jason was older, the Bridger kids would garner a lot of attention from the new Jedi Order, but neither Mira, Jason, nor Ben would join. They much preferred their father's or their big brother's method of teaching, because Ezra Bridger wasn't just a Jedi, but a loving person, one who had fulfilled the dream, and with his family, lived out that dream for the rest of their lives. And that, my friends, is our wholesome PP story. Special thanks to the patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Alexander Reese, The Beginning and End, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Grid36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, Django Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Puremark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tib, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granny Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cully Rooney, Chuck Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weeba 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Twister Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, John Nguyen, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Galaxy 66, Man Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Forward Sleazy Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, Me 3 First Names, Darksing46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Let's talk about the story. First things first, my voice is all the way effed up. I was yelling at the Eagles on the television as if they could hear me. Go Birds. Anyways, this was a lot of fun. I'm going to talk to you about my biggest influences for this, and it might make sense, but Ezra and Leia are very much so Black Cat, Golden Retriever relationship dynamic, which to me is Hiccup and Astrid from How to Train Your Dragon. Probably the best cinematic version of a relationship that works, and that's kind of what I went for. Initially, the idea of Palpatine's death was kind of funny, but then I thought about it, it was like, actually this would kind of work. Having Ezra and Leia kill Palpatine through identity theft is kind of hilarious, because identity theft is one of Ezra's two big personality traits: professional goober, professional identity theft. And so I thought that would just be kind of fun to include in there. But that's all I really have to say. My voice is kicking out on me after yelling at the Eagles. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all. Spread the love. And always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you. Go Birds!